Okie doke. So carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and nitrogen, or for short, how I tell you to remember it is CHOPN. CHOPN. What is that? Well, here's a picture as a hint. Remember, these are the biomolecules. We have carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. These are the four molecules that make up all living things. And they're all made up of some combination of these elements: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, nitrogen, or CHOPN. So, what's the right answer here? Is it the elements that only make up DNA? No. They're the elements that make up amino acids? I mean, yes, but they make up more than just amino acids, right? Because proteins are made up of amino acids. The 5 elements that all living things are made up of? Yes. D says the 5 elements that make up animals but not plants. That's not true because it's all living things. Plants are living things, animals, plants, bacteria. Every living thing is made up of some combination of these 4 biomolecules, which is made up of some combination of these 5 elements, CHOPN. Okay. Community. That's the only thing I tell you, community. You have to tell me what a community is. So, is community a group of organisms of the same species living in the same ecosystem? Is it a group of organisms of different species living in the same ecosystem? Is it the living factors, which are called biotic, plus all the non-living abiotic factors? Or is it a group of people living in the same area? What is it? Remember my terrible song, same population, different community. So a community is a group of, are these the same species together or different? They're different, right? So just remember, same population, same species, different species together, community. So what's the right answer? It's not A. A says the same. Same as population. It's not C. C is ecosystem, biotic factors and abiotic factors. No, it's a group of organisms of different. Yeah, there you go. All right. So what am I looking at here? DNA. And what's this other one over here that's like DNA but single-stranded? RNA, right? What's another difference between DNA and RNA? DNA is made up of these 4 guys. What do we? GCAT, right? That's what we call that for short. GCAT, GCAT. What about RNA? Is it GCAT too? No, it's right. They're all the same. It's not cat, it's cow, remember? Yeah. GCAU. So there's a U, uracil, instead of a T, thymine, and it's only single-stranded, right? So what are guanine, cytosine, adenine, and uracil, or GCAU? Are they? Yep. The 4 nitrogen bases that make up RNA, right? Not DNA, that's GCAT. They're not biomolecules. Biomolecules are these big giant molecules like carbs, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids, okay? Now, DNA and RNA are nucleic acids, which are one of the 4 biomolecules that make up all living things, but they are not, GCA and U are not the biomolecules. They're just parts that make up one of the biomolecules. Okay, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide. Is it the gas that plants breathe out that animals absorb? Is it the gas that mitochondria use to create ATP? Is it the gas that's created as a waste during photosynthesis? Or is it the gas that animals breathe out that plants absorb? Well, let's see. Let's look at this chart here. Remember the carbon cycle? CO2 goes into the air. It also gets taken out of the air. Basically, there's only one thing that really takes carbon out of the air. And what is that? Photosynthesis, right?
Yes.
And it gets taken out of the air and put into what? Plants, right? So, or producers. So, what's the right answer here? Do animals breathe it in and plants breathe it out, or do animals breathe it out and plants breathe it in? Right? Animals breathe it out and plants breathe it in. So CO2 comes out of animals, goes into the air, and then plants absorb it and use it to make food, which animals eat, and then they put it back in the air, and then we close the loop, right? The endocrine system. The endocrine system. Okay, well, let's look at what the endocrine system is as a reminder. Remember, it's in males and females, and it is the system of glands that create hormones, which are just chemical signals that, you know, trigger certain things to happen in the body. So, what's the answer? Is it the body system that delivers oxygen and nutrients to the body's tissues? Is it the body system made up of lymph nodes? A body system made up of glands and hormones? A body system that's made up of hair, skin, and nails? What body system is made up of hair, skin, and nails? That's integumentary, right? But that's not what we're looking for, so we can roll that out, right? We're looking for endocrine. Lymph nodes, the word lymph should be a dead giveaway. Lymph is the lymphatic system. The body system that delivers oxygen and nutrients to the body's tissues. Remember, that's your cardiovascular system. You know, your bloodstream is like the highways that all that stuff travels on. So it is, yeah. It's C, the body system made up of glands and hormones. So just remember, endocrine, glands, and hormones. Okay? Yes, ma'am. The one before this was, oh, you know that. Animals breathe it out, plants absorb it in. Okay, difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Can you guys guess without even looking at the answer choices? Remember the difference between pro and euc? What's the difference? You said you knew. Nucleus, good. Which one does not have a nucleus? Right, pro. Remember, pro means no nucleus. And what does euc mean? Euc means nucleus. Euc has the nucleus, okay? Correct. All right, DNA is rewritten into mRNA, which is then translated into amino acids. So what is that? What is this whole process that's happening here? Where DNA, double-stranded GCAT, is being rewritten into a single strand of GCal or RNA. And then we use that single-stranded GCal RNA to make amino acids like these 3 amino acids here, 1, 2, 3, which then get linked together like a chain to make a larger structure that we call a protein. So is that the process of protein synthesis? Is it cells using oxygen to make ATP? Plants using CO2 to make glucose? Or the process of making glucose? What are we describing here when we say DNA being rewritten into mRNA and then translated into amino acids? Yes. It is the process of protein synthesis. We're creating a protein, right? That's what it means to synthesize something, to create it.
Yeah.
So we're creating a protein. How do we create the protein? Take DNA, rewrite the DNA as a single strand of RNA. That's transcription. That's step one, transcription. After we've rewritten the single strand RNA from the DNA, we translate that, translation step two, into amino acids, link them together, make the protein. Okay, pulling one half of the DNA to one side of the cell and the other half to the other. So what am I looking at here in this picture? These are different stages of something. No, well, there is DNA in the pictures. Yes, that's what the chromosomes are. Yes, these are cells. And what's happening to these cells? We got prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. This is PMAT or PMAT, which are the 4 stages of what's that process where cells make a copy of themselves. Remember how cells do that? They split in half, and each half becomes a new cell. It's like if you just cut yourself in half and each half grew into an identical copy of the original you. That's how cells do it. So these are the 4 stages of that process. Do you remember what it's called? It's called mitosis. So so mitosis, what are the 4 stages of mitosis again? How do we remember them? PMAT, PMAT, right? So we've got a bunch of these. We got GCAT, GCal, PMAT, right? So we got all these things, and you just have to remember, these are shorter ways to remember larger, more complex things. So when I say pulling one half of DNA to one side of the cell and the other half to the other, where is that happening? Which of these 4 stages is that happening in? So this orange stuff, that's the DNA. So you can see the DNA is inside the nucleus here, right? In prophase. Okay. Now that's step 1 of mitosis. And in step 1, these little blue lines, these are spindle fibers. They form. They weren't there, but then they form. And that happens in prophase. And then in metaphase, where's the DNA now? In the middle. Remember, meta means middle. Meta, middle. So just remember in metaphase, the DNA lines up in the middle. And look at these blue lines, these spindle fibers. You see how they've extended? They were shorter here, but now in metaphase, they've extended all the way out to grab these chromosomes on both sides. So there's one on this side and one on this side. And then the next thing that happens is anaphase, which, what's happening here? Yeah, the DNA is being ripped in half, right? Half the DNA to that side, half the DNA to the other side. The spindle fibers, these blue lines, are what are doing that. So when I say pulling one half of the DNA to one side of the cell and the other half to the other, that's what I mean. That's these spindle fibers doing that. And it happens during anaphase, which is part of mitosis. So what's the answer here? Is it what happens during metaphase? No, because that's when the DNA lines up in the middle. Is it the job of the spindle fibers during mitosis? Yes. Once again, the blue things, spindle fibers. Just remember that spindle fibers rip the DNA in half. Okay. The ability to perform photosynthesis. So here's photosynthesis, right? Plants use sun energy, CO2 from the air, water from the soil. They combine it all to make food. And what do they make as a waste product that they release? You don't hold on to waste. Remember, you release waste. That's why it's called waste.
Okay.
So what is the plant's version of waste? I'm circling it. Oxygen, okay? All right. So what is the ability to perform photosynthesis? Is that what protists are known for? Is that what makes fungi able to decompose dead organic matter? Is it what allows plants to use oxygen to create glucose? Remember, plants don't use oxygen to make glucose. Plants use CO2 to make glucose, which is their food. Yes, it's the difference between plants and fungi. So you'll probably have a question about plants versus fungi. Just always remember that the difference is that plants do photosynthesis, fungi do not. Okay, this one's kind of tricky, but stay with me here. It says, does the same job in viruses that the nuclear membrane does for the cell? Okay, so the nuclear membrane is the membrane that goes around the nucleus. Okay. This thing here, oh, and what is it? I'm sorry, in the cell, what's inside the nucleus of a cell? DNA. So the nuclear membrane is the nucleus membrane. It's what wraps around the nucleus and protects the DNA inside. So what is the name of the thing on the virus that wraps around the DNA and protects the DNA inside of it? Well, number two, the number two that they have labeled here, that is the DNA, right? So what is that number one thing, the thing labeled number one that is surrounding the DNA and protecting it? Correct, the capsid. Good. So the capsid, which is the thing that surrounds the DNA in viruses, does the same job as the membrane of the nucleus in cells, which wraps around and protects the DNA. And this is just another example. This is it's a different virus, but it's the same thing. It's got the capsid surrounding the DNA inside. Actually, that's RNA, not DNA, but still. Okay. The substrate can no longer be affected by the enzyme. The substrate can no longer be affected. So we have an enzyme here and a substrate. Remember the lock and key model. So enzymes are these things in your cells that take something and turn it into something else. So their job is to convert one thing into another thing. But they act like a lock and key. The enzymes are like the lock. They can only change things that fit their exact shape, just like a key. Just like certain locks only work with certain keys, certain enzymes only work with certain substrates. The word substrate just applies to whatever it is that the enzyme is going to change. So what happens if you change the shape of the lock or the enzyme? Correct. It won't fit anymore. So when I say that the substrate can no longer be affected by the enzyme, the substrate can no longer plug into the enzyme, or the key can no longer fit the lock. So is that what happens when the shape of the enzyme is changed? Yes, but this one's a trick. Because think about this. What happens when your body temperature gets too far off from where it should be? And what happens when the pH of your body is far off from where it should be? Or all of the above? The answer is all of the above. Let me tell you why. Because it is what happens when the shape of the enzyme is changed. But your body temperature and your body pH are the two things that can change the shape of the enzyme. So if you get too hot, this enzyme, it will warp. If your body's pH gets too acidic or too basic, it will warp and it will no longer work. So the answer is actually all of the above. Let me get through this. Good. Yeah, let me get through this first. Okay, active transport. Which one of these is active transport? Well, it's labeled active transport on the right, passive transport on the left. What's the difference? Do you guys remember the thing to look out for when you're trying to see if it's active or passive transport? Sorry, hold on. What's the dead giveaway that something is active transport? There's a certain three-letter molecule, yes, ATP. You see this ATP right here? What is ATP? It's this energy, right? It's the same thing as energy. So when you see ATP, you're looking at energy. If there's energy involved, that means it's active transport. If there's no energy involved, that means it's passive transport. And there's two kinds of passive transport. There's what's called diffusion and facilitated diffusion. Do you know what facilitated means? It means to be helped or assisted. So we have diffusion that happens on its own, and then we have diffusion that needs a little help. So diffusion that happens on its own is like water. Imagine these little purple balls are water. Water is one of the things that can passively diffuse into and out of your cell easily. Because those molecules are so small, water molecules are so small that they can actually slip right between these phospholipids that make up your cell membrane. And they can actually go into and out of the cell as they please because they're that small. But in facilitated diffusion, that's for larger molecules that can't fit between these guys and go in and out as they please. So they have to use a door that we call a transport protein. So they're still diffusing. It just means that they're being helped, which is why it's called facilitated diffusion, not regular diffusion. All right, but let's get back to this. So which one of these is active transport? Is it A, B, C, or D? Well, transport of water into and out of the bloodstream. Remember, water doesn't need active transport. That's passive. It goes in and out as it wants. Yes, it is B, transport of substances into and out of the cell that requires energy. It doesn't not require energy. That's passive. Also, oxygen and carbon dioxide, those are other things that can go into and out of the cell as they please. So water, oxygen, and CO2, those three things can go into and out of the cell as much as they want, whenever they want. They don't need to be assisted or facilitated. And it doesn't require energy either. All right, this one just says 50%. 50%. So I got a Punnett Square, a monohybrid cross, where we're just looking at one trait, either green or yellow. I've got a homozygous recessive parent. And what is this parent? Over here, big G, little g, what is that? Is that homorecessive, homodominant, or hetero? Remember, homorecessive is both recessive, like this parent up here. Homodominant would be both dominant. That'd be big G, big G. Hetero is a mix. So what is this parent? This parent's hetero, right? Okay. So what is 50%? Is that the chance that the parents above will produce a homozygous recessive offspring? How many of these offspring, 1, 2, 3, 4, how many are homorecessive? Or in other words, both recessive? 2 out of how many? 4, which is what percent? 50. So that's the answer, right? A. It's the chance that the parents above will produce a homozygous recessive offspring. All right. Vascular tissue. Is that the tissue that covers the outside of plants and animals? Is your vascular tissue, is that on the outside of your body? Nope. Is that the tissue that absorbs nutrients from food? Nope. Your digestive tissues absorb nutrients from food. Your vascular tissue transports it from your stomach area to the rest of the body. Okay? So it's not doing the absorbing, it's doing the transportation. Is it tissues that only transport nutrients in animals?
Wait.
Only animals? No. Is it the name of the tissue that transports nutrients in both plants and animals? Yes. So plants have vascular tissue, animals have vascular tissue. They do the same thing in each. They transport water and nutrients from one part of the body to another part of the body. In people, we have arteries and veins that carry stuff from one part of the body to another. And in plants, we have xylem and phloem. But it's all the same stuff and it all does the same job and it's all called vascular. All right, cell respiration. Remember what cell respiration is. Oxygen and glucose, that pyruvate, that's just another word for glucose. It's actually half a glucose if you take glucose, cut it in half. But you don't need to know that. I just want you to think, just know that that's like glucose food molecules, okay? And oxygen, so you eat food and you breathe in oxygen, and then the food you ate and the oxygen you breathed in go into your mitochondria, and your mitochondria combines the two to make H2O, CO2, and what? The magic three-letter energy molecule. What's the three-letter? ATP. Good. So what is cell respiration? Is it the process in plants that requires oxygen to create ATP? It doesn't happen in plants. Remember, plants don't do this. Plants do photosynthesis. Is it the process in animals that require carbon dioxide to create ATP? It does happen in animals, but we don't use carbon dioxide to make ATP. We use oxygen. The process of burning ATP to make glucose? No, it's actually the opposite. We're burning glucose to make ATP, not the other way around. So it's got to be D. The process in animals that requires oxygen to create ATP. Happens in animals, oxygen goes in, ATP comes out. Happens in the mitochondria. Okay, 10%. What is 10%? Is it the amount of energy that makes it from a higher trophic level to a lower trophic level? In other words, does 10% of the energy in level 4 go to level 3? Higher to lower? Or is it the other way around? Energy doesn't get passed on from higher levels to lower levels. It doesn't go from the top down. It goes from the bottom up. It starts here in the producer level, right? That's where the most energy is. And then that energy gets passed on to rabbits when rabbits eat the producers, right? They eat the grass. But how much energy goes from the grass into the rabbit? 10%. And how much of that energy goes from the rabbit's level into the snake's level? 10% of that, right? And then from the snake into the hawk, another 10% of that. So the 10% rule. So it's not the amount of energy that goes from higher to lower levels, it's the amount of energy that goes from lower levels to higher levels, which is C, right? Okay, we're getting close. Gene expression. Gene expression, what is that? Oops, you know what? I forgot to change this answer choice. Skip that one. Just put C for that one. I got to fix that. I'm sorry. but let's skip that one for now. The difference between primary and secondary succession. So what is the difference between primary and secondary? Actually, I'm just going to delete this one altogether. All right, what's the difference between primary and secondary? So remember, in primary succession, oh, geez, what happened? Sorry. Okay, so in primary succession, what do we start with? Bare rock. And in secondary succession, what do we start with? Grass or something, right? We start with something, and then it turns into something else. So the difference between primary and secondary is in primary, we go from nothing to something, and it takes a lot longer to do that, by the way. And in secondary, you go from something old to something new, and that doesn't take near as long. All right, so what's the answer? Is it primary succession happens after a forest fire burned down the forest? Nope, because that means something was there before. The forest was there before, and a new forest grew in its place. That's not primary. Primary starts from bare rock and takes longer than secondary? Yes. Also, remember that pioneer species mean the first species. So, like the pioneers were like early settlers, right? The first settlers, we call those pioneers. So, pioneer species means first species to live there. That's the pioneer species there. So, like, that's the first thing to ever start living there where there used to be bare rock. Okay. That's only in primary. If you have a question about that, make sure that you know that pioneer species are only in primary succession. Just think primary pioneer, primary pioneer. Okay, the cause of cancer. What's the cause of cancer? Here's a tumor that's growing. These blue cells are the cancer cells, how they're growing out of control. They end up sucking all the nutrients away from all the healthy cells around them, and they kill the healthy cells around them. And then the tumor continues to spread, and they just keep killing healthy cells everywhere they go. So is that a mutation in the DNA that causes cells to grow much larger than they normally would? Are these cancerous cells growing much larger? Is that why they're getting big? Or is it a mutation in the DNA that causes cells to make excessive proteins? Well, they are making excessive proteins, but that's only because we have excessive cells. So each cell is not making more proteins. There's more cells. So I'm trying to trick you here. So let's read the other ones. A mutation in the DNA that prevents cells from being able to multiply. So are we stopping cells from being able to multiply? Or are we preventing cells from being able to stop multiplying? It's D, a mutation in the DNA that prevents cells from being able to stop. So they continue to multiply out of control. They're not getting bigger. Each cell isn't making more proteins, although overall more proteins are being made because there's more cells. But the cause of the cancer is cells can't stop. They can't stop dividing or multiplying, whatever. Why we have a standardized naming system system of naming species. Why do we standardize the system of naming species? Yep, remember this species name? Remember it's got two names, right? A first name and a last name. What does the first name tell you? The genus, right? And then the last name, Arctos, is the species name, right? So this bear is Ursus arctos. Genus Ursus, species Arctos, Ursus arctos, right? Why do we do that? Why do we do that? Why do we give each individual species a scientific name that is unique to only that species? Yes. Yep. Does it organize all living things in a group based on common characteristics? It does. Does it avoid confusion of organisms? Does it organize animals based on how closely related they are? Yes. So it's all the above, right? Good. And that's the ball game. Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba.